Thank you, Robert, and thank you, everybody, for your attendance today for these very, very important topics. This is our 26th event, and it's a pleasure to be working with Robert and putting these together and meeting all of you and sharing ideas and thoughts. We have a very capable group here, and I'm honored to speak with these gentlemen. One of the things I'll start with is when you look at this topic of the convergence of financial crime and terrorism, I want to break it into two segments. Counter-terrorist financing really came into the world in a very, very big way after 9/11 in the United States, followed up by the attacks in India in 2002, Russia and Spain in 2004, and then the UK multiple times in 2005. There was a global reaction from a government perspective against terrorist financing. The global response, as normal, was sanctions, attacking various areas, going after certain types of business, and in some situations, warlike activities and actually direct war. This approach ended the angel investor type investing into Hezbollah, Hamas, and others, where rich individuals and very wealthy organizations would donate specifically to the terrorist organizations. Through following the money approach, these angel investors were identified and eliminated, and that changed the approach, and that changed the way terrorist financing took place. The new approach started from targeting state actors and looking at various methodologies to take criminal activity and fund it, which was very, very different than anything prior. One of the things that I found interesting is, in order to solve problems, you have to look at the history of the problem. Terrorism didn't start on 9/11 or 2005. Terrorism actually goes back all the way to the Roman Empire. The first terrorist activities that were documented were actually in Judea going against the Roman Empire. And so they have a history here. This is a long time. Criminal activity has been going on, some can say, since Cain and Abel. So, I mean, both of these things have started with different ideology based on greed on one side and based on change and dissatisfaction on the other side. And when you have those things come together, that's what we're dealing with in the world right now. And the reality of it is, as far as crime and criminal activity, there's thousands and thousands of organizations, there's thousands and thousands of actors. It's estimated in 2019 that there were 250 terrorist organizations around the world working in 6 continents in 70 countries. That's a big problem. That's 250 well-known organizations classified terrorist. Now, that's thousands and thousands of cells, that's thousands and thousands of people. So this is not a small problem, as we all know. And one of the things that we're always talking about, and we calculate very differently, the cost of this problem. Terrorist, the cost is X. Criminality, the cost is Y. We need to start thinking differently about that, and I think the gentlemen are going to follow up with how we need to think differently. Basically, a transnational organization is very, very undefined. Basically, the global definition of a transnational organized crime unit is 3 people working in a cross-border situation. So that's what we, the world, call this. This is way bigger than that. We need to kind of start classifying a 3-person organization with a 30,000-person organization with trade channels around the world going from Latin America to the Middle East into Eastern Europe into the main countries. I mean, this is a very big thing. What I always found interesting, like most problems of the world, it's communication and definitions. When you're writing and policy makers are working and law enforcement is working and everything, we always have problems with definitions and languages. So one of the definitions for terrorism is X in one country, Y in another, and someplace else is called something different. Same thing with criminality. What's legal in one country is illegal someplace else. The words are very different. So it's very confusing. So there's not one answer that we could all just walk out of here and fix. But I do find that when you look at political scientists, they're looking at things from one perspective. Economists are looking at it from another and have different definitions, and then a criminologist has different definitions yet again. So what we do is we create different silos of thought, not just silos of databases and various things like that. We have different silos of thought. So when I'm speaking to a criminologist and I'm on the board of a university that specializes in criminology, it's very interesting because they're not looking at it from a terrorist perspective or an economic perspective. They're looking at it from a law enforcement perspective. When I look at this, and I think my colleagues, when we look at this, we look at what is the detriment to society? What is the detriment to the country? What is the detriment to some of these communities that this takes place with? And I'll get into that a little bit later. But like terrorism, transnational organized crime affects the community down to the little bodega, the little store at the corner. It affects everybody in the community. And what happens is, the same as terrorism, when you have transnational criminal activity, and you look along the trade routes, nobody wants to invest in those areas because their people are afraid, there's corruption, and then what's happening is people are not investing in those areas, and then all of a sudden the neighborhood starts to collapse, which makes it open for terrorist activity. So this is unified. When you go into a region or an area or a neighborhood or even a block or a street, when you attack that street from a psychological perspective using either criminality or terrorism, the same results happen. That street becomes isolated. Now, as that becomes bigger and bigger and spreads out to the community and sometimes out to a country, what happens is the rest of the world, instead of looking at this pragmatically, they start to boycott that area. They don't make investments. They put them on a sanctions list, which actually just makes the problem worse and worse and worse. And that's something that I really feel strongly about. Crime can lead to a safe haven country status for some people. Crime could lead to so many different things. And then the terrorists come in because it's easy to manipulate the society. Years ago, I remember speaking with people. There was an admiral from the US Navy, and he was showing me these pictures. It was so fascinating. When you look at a map of the world and you look at the lights of the world in some of the countries and the darkness in the world in other countries, it's very simple. The darkness wants the light, and the light is afraid of the dark. So then what happens is nobody's communicating, and everybody starts building walls and fences from people perspective and a personality perspective. There's ways to deal with this versus isolating countries that are doing it. It's rather work with them, work together, work in a partnership, sharing information, sharing ideas, not just about terrorism, because I think we've done a much better job on a global basis of doing that, but on a criminal basis. I don't think we're doing a very good job of sharing information on a criminal basis because of corruption and other reasons. But the same approach and the same thinking that we use for terrorist financing needs to be applied to global organized crime activities. Now, when you get these two things working, and they're two very detrimental things, basically you're dealing with greed versus a grievance. And when I could have this debate for 15 or 20 hours, we're not going to go down that. There's greed. People just want the money. They don't care about anything. Then there's other people that have a grievance with a government or an official, and they want to change society. That's crime and terrorism, money versus change. This is all it. But when you look at the ideology, it's illicit activity. And somebody's going to get hurt, and either one, they're both getting hurt on a regular basis. The convergence started with ad hoc transactions. So terrorists needed passports, they didn't know how to get them. They would go to a criminal, they would get the passport. They would get illegal documents, they would get other things. So basically you had ad hoc relationships for many, many years between criminals and terrorists. One of the things that we were speaking about earlier, terrorists don't make good criminals. They're not that good at it. So they actually need the criminals to go get these things. So that's when you get this intersection of the two and they start working together. That started with weapons, lodging, hiding people, and then what happened is it was happening on a regular basis because terrorism expanded, and they kept going back to the criminals, where the criminals were like, hey, this is a regular source of funds, which is more of a criminal attitude. So they started partnering more freely. Crime organizations didn't want the additional risk of being classified a terrorist because that would signal them out for law enforcement, and other governments would come after them. So they were very careful to stay away from the terrorists and being branded a terrorist organization. But as society has grown, particularly in Africa and Latin America, they've come together and they don't seem to care anymore. And that's the dangerous part. So you have criminal organizations that are acting as terrorists and terrorists acting as criminal organizations. It's a policy nightmare when you deal with it that way. A very good example of this, and people don't always look at it this way, but ISIS was a great criminal organization. Started out as a terrorist organization. They wound up taking approximately 34,000 square miles. That's the size of the state of Maine. They created their own enterprise. They had the self-supporting criminal activities in that 34,000 miles. They were generating almost $3 billion a year in annual revenue in criminal activities. So, I mean, this is a real case of what took place. What enables these things to come together, criminality and terrorism, is basically poverty, a lack of education, a lack of basic resources. I mean, they pry on poor people. They pry on the underdeveloped people, people that need us the most. This is where they get hurt the most on a regular basis. That's not new. But we as a society have to start looking at neighborhoods and countries and areas that need our help, need our funding, need our assistance in so many different ways before it gets darker and darker and darker, and not wait until there's such bad activity that they get sanctioned, which just speeds up the whole process. What are the next steps? We need to start looking at illicit financial flows, whether it's terrorism, doesn't make a difference, criminality, doesn't matter. Policymakers need to look at what is the illicit activity route, not looking at the meaning behind it. When we start getting into the definitional arguments of terrorism and criminality, we lose. What we need to look at is the illicit funds flow. Regardless of the mentality behind the funds flow, we need to look at that. Terrorist organizations are less successful on these illicit financial activities if we could break those funds flows, which is run by criminals. And that'll be a lot easier than dealing with. What we need to do is go after high-profile prosecution cases, make it very public on the corruption side and on the criminal organization side. Let it be known that this illicit channel is being broken, and disrupt the trafficking routes with strong border controls. I'm going to repeat that again. Disrupt the trafficking routes with strong border controls. And I think we also need to disrupt the trafficking with strong border controls. I don't think I need to say it a fifth time, but without border controls, you will not solve this problem. So this is not a political issue. If you do not have a strong border, you don't know what's going across the border, whether it be people, illicit activity, human beings, lumber, gold, gems, antiquities, artwork, anything. So without a strong border across the world, that does not close down business. It protects societies. In closing, I'm going to ask the policymakers, colleges, academia, law enforcement to come together, share information and ideas like we do with terrorist financing, because it's a hot topic and nobody wants terror. It's the same thing with corruption. We're not sharing the information properly. We have to get better at that. And we need to finally have law enforcement and governments understand that for so many years we worked for globalization. We wanted it. It's here now. We are a global community. People are going to have cross-border payments, cross-border businesses. We can't stop these things. What we need to do is design methodologies to make them safer and to protect society by not limiting globalization, but by embracing globalization, sharing information, and doing it in a way that protects society, and particularly the most vulnerable of society, which are the poor, the uneducated, and the people that don't have natural resources. So the way to do this going forward is really work together, collaborate, and that's not a cliche. We can do this. We did it very effectively with terrorism. We just need to do that with criminality at this point. I'll pass it off to my friend, Mr. Campos.